Okay, so we are recording. As I mentioned, Jolie is a little down and out, having gotten her second dose of the COVID vaccine. So she has a little presentation that she prepared, and then I'll give you guys her contact information afterwards should you have any questions. So with that, I'm going to share her presentation. Hold on, let's see. Motion and video. Okay. Hopefully this works. You guys give me the thumbs up if this is working once I start playing. Okay.
Hello, my name is Jolie Busby, and I'm the Associate Director for ECU's Continuing and Professional Education. I'm speaking to you today via recording versus live, and I apologize for that, but it's for a good reason. I recently got my second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, which I'm very excited about. But as expected, I am feeling under the weather today, and I'm sorry for that. But I think I've got a great presentation for you. Danielle Rivenbark invited me to speak, and I selected the topic of crisis communication. Prior to my position at ECU, I worked at the University of Arkansas, where my role included organizing leadership workshops for the public sector, managers and supervisors. One of the most important workshops we offered was crisis communication, a topic that is not discussed enough in many leadership roles. And often, as staff, we rely on the organization's public relations team to handle high-profile situations. But as leaders in all positions, we should understand that a crisis forces those around us and those who report to us to look directly at us for answers. And as I say here, we must be prepared to manage a crisis if and when it is thrust upon us. This presentation will cover an overview of crisis communication and discuss best practices for leading others through challenging times. And of course, as a full disclaimer, I personally am not an expert in this field, but I have worked with a few that are. The information I share with you today is drawn from subject matter experts, and I will cite those resources throughout the slides and have a list of resources at the end of the presentation. And while I'm not a subject matter expert, like you, I may feel like an expert at receiving very bad crisis communication. So let's go ahead and get started. Our learning objectives for this presentation are to define crisis communication and to recognize the demands and expectations of leadership during a crisis, and then to identify best practices. So what is a business crisis? It's really any business, regardless of size or industry or sector, that is threatened by a financial or organizational stability. A business crisis is inherently abnormal, unstable, complex situation that represents a threat to the strategic objectives, reputation, or existence of an organization. A crisis can spread at a very fast pace and impact the company's image, reputation, financial health, regulatory compliance, and even its employees. And if not handled right away, the crisis can permanently damage the business or even cause it to fail. As Timothy Goodman points out, nothing prepares you for change better than the awareness of what you can and cannot do about it. So, in a crisis, experts have determined essentially three phases. And to manage it, they look at it as a pre-crisis, or the phase that's concerned with prevention and preparation. The crisis response, the phase when management must actually respond to a crisis. And then the post-crisis. This phase looks for ways to better prepare for the next crisis and fulfills commitments made during the crisis phase, including follow-up information. And to apply it for our field today, it can be something pretty basic as we think about it. Pre-crisis can be the event planning where we think about all of our contingencies. What will we do as a plan B if the food is late? What will we do if the kitchen breaks down? In a hotel, what if there's a flood? Do we have a backup location in case there's a weather emergency? But then in your role, you have to respond. This is when we go into action. Whether we have a plan B or not, we have to respond. And then the post-crisis, I actually think of this as a debriefing when we go back and look at what we could have done better and what we'll do next time if the same situation occurs. So depending on your position or role in the organization, you may or may not feel that you have much influence on a pre-crisis phase, but you must be ready for the crisis response phase. Understanding that a crisis is a state of feeling. This is important. It's not just a physical event or a location or logistic issue. An internal experience of confusion and anxiety to the degree that formerly successful coping mechanisms fail us and ineffective decisions and behaviors take their place. And as a result, you or others in a crisis may feel confused, vulnerable, anxious, afraid, angry, guilty, hopeless, and helpless. Perceptions often and memory may be distorted. And the pandemic is so recent and still going. Most of us can probably relate to one or all of these feelings, and especially for me, the one about time and memory. Some of it's just a blur. The following concepts I thought were really interesting, and these are out and about in the field of crisis communication. And I think they're concepts that we can relate to. So essentially, these were taken, I think, during the pandemic. The idea of sense making, that the active recreation of reality through discourse, we're talking it out, talking to our friends or family, writing about it, blogging about it. And then the cosmology episode, the complete loss of sense-making ability where the world no longer operates in an orderly or understood manner. Definitely true for me. I love the next one, Vuja Day, the feeling that I have never been here before and I don't know what comes next. Very true. The attitude of wisdom, I think this is important. To understand the limits of your own understanding and act with conviction until new information challenges your reality. And I think of that as being adaptive to the situation. And then last, the significant choice, and that's having enough information to make an informed decision. So as we're thinking about the state that we're in, it's helpful to reduce the psychological impact of a crisis, that people must feel empowered to take actions that will help reduce their risk of emotional, psychological, or physical harm. So understanding crisis communication can help us take specific steps to support our colleagues in direct reports by instilling belief that they can take specific steps to improve a situation. So if we need crisis communication, what is it? And the basic definition is that crisis communication is the collection, processing, and dissemination of information required to address a crisis situation. So we're just going to sit on that for a moment and understand that it's distinction from other types of communication. We're not marketing. We're not giving directions. It's a very different type of way to communicate to others. So our second objective is to understand and recognize the demands and expectations of leadership, that's us, during a crisis. And the most important one is to be clear, to have clear and trustworthy communication. In general, people want access to as much information as possible. And while in some cases too much information may be problematic, too little enhances the psychological stress. And I don't think it would be hard for any of us to think of a time or an experience when we were in this situation, when we wanted to know what was going on, but there was little information to be had, and the emotional response that we felt because of it. So, why should we be prepared? As leaders, why should we be prepared for a crisis and be ready to communicate during a crisis? And I think these 2 points are valid, which is if you don't communicate and you don't have a plan, a lack of trust in the workplace can lead to dysfunctional work environments and a cycle of unhealthy responses that affect engagement and productivity. And as leaders of a team or even our colleagues working in a dysfunctional work environment, it starts to collapse on itself. Next is that people prefer honest answers, even when the news is bad. And that it's tough for leaders who lose trust and gain it back. And if you've not had that happen to you personally, where people lost their trust in you, you might have a memory of when you've lost trust in someone else. So basically, once the trust is gone, it may never come back. So what do we do? Best practices in the field say that the number one thing is just to be ready. I also say it's just to be mindful that this can occur and to be mindful that while it may not seem like your job, if you're a good leader, you will be prepared to respond even when you don't want to be. So to be ready. Through crisis, though crises are almost by definition unexpected, effective leaders can and should still prepare for them. You know, even if you think that you don't have time or it's not your job, if you know your audience, you can be clear and provide all that you know. And that when a crisis hits, leaders should focus on managing their internal experience first before providing direction to their teams and communities. And when I read that, my first thought is when we're flying and the airline attendants are going through the safety processes and they say if the oxygen masks come down that you should put yours on first before you help someone else. And I think that's very much true here, is that before we interact with others, we should be very aware of ourselves, our body language, our feelings, our tone. That leaders should think about themselves as islands of coherence in a sea of chaos. Your ability to manage yourself in this process, to stay grounded and clear in a situation that's totally disorienting, is really what will make or break you. I agree, Jeremy Hunter. The second thing that's identified as a best practice is to know your company's plan. Almost all organizations, even small businesses, will have some type of crisis communication plan. It's here that I realize I must really like this quote, because here it is again. Though crises are almost by definition unexpected, effective leaders can and should still prepare for them. Well, I put that in twice, so that's enough to say if you're prepared, part of that is knowing that your company is prepared. At a minimum, leaders should have an action plan in place for various potential emergencies, including an economic crisis, a major lawsuit, or a natural disaster. But there's two key terms that I like here, and one is the golden hour, and that's about time. So the hour that you have from a trigger event until you need to make a statement to the media. So basically, communicate quickly and efficiently before it starts to take off like fire. And then the Velcro effect is if there have been past crises that negatively affect how current crises are perceived, meaning if your organization has had issues in the past, unfortunately, that will impact how people perceive the current crisis situation. Hopefully that is not true where you work. And then the last best practice is to generally understand the structure of a crisis communication response. Anytime there's a natural disaster, I always look at the press conferences usually given by the governor of a state, maybe where a hurricane is. As I was saying, before rudely being stopped by my recording software, during a crisis, I often look for the press conferences that a governor may give in a state where a hurricane is headed their way. North Carolina is very experienced at this situation. And when you watch the press conference, it's very structured, very organized. The governor begins, and then at some point he starts to hand off the microphone or the podium to an expert like the director of emergency services or someone from the health department. And then it will rotate through the different experts that are all there in the room standing behind the governor. They field questions, they say what they know, they say what they don't know, they say when they're going to give an update. So crisis communication is an organized and structured process, often practiced by organizations so that everyone knows their role and they know where to meet and to get organized prior to a press conference. In our case, what we need really as managers is just to understand a basic response. And I like this worksheet because it just underscores what we need, which is the key message. Who are the spokespeople that we should look to? And if not, it might be us if we're in the right place at the right time and someone asks us. And what they want to know is what happened. So we say, this is what's happened. We only tell the facts. We say when it happened, where it happened, and most importantly, what are we doing about it? And the note there to show concern or empathy is very important. When you're speaking to the public or colleagues, watch your body language, watch your tone. Think of yourself and pull it together because people are going to pick up on that and question the things that you're saying. So do show care, do show concern. That may take a little practice if you're anxious or you're upset yourself, but if you're ready, this will be much easier for you. I like this example. It's essentially what a company might send out via email to everyone about what their policy is, what they're doing, what they know. This one's specific to the pandemic and the coronavirus. I like that it has images. I like that there is a phone number or a website that can direct people to more information. And the very last line is support. It says, we're all here to support you. Stay safe. It's a very positive message. Even if it's not a lot of information, it's something versus avoiding the topic altogether. And lastly, just a few resources if you're interested in this topic, and I hope that you are. You can find a lot of resources just by Googling. The ones listed here I have referenced earlier in the slides, or any of the names that I've used for quotes are easily searchable. There's a lot of information, and right now I think most of it is being updated. The global pandemic likely forced everyone to review their crisis communication plans and update them, hopefully, to be more effective and more helpful. But mostly today, I want to say that we should all be prepared. We are all leaders, no matter the position that we hold. People look to us, and we should be ready. And I thank you again so much for the opportunity to speak to you. Again, I'm very sorry not to be with you live today, but I will tell you that I'm celebrating. I'm not feeling great. That's a good sign that my immune system is doing its job. And I am looking forward to being fully vaccinated and back in the world hopefully the way that we recall when the world gets back on its feet. So I wish you all the best. Have a great rest of the day. And Danielle has my contact information if you'd ever like to reach out. Thank you.
Okay. I hope you guys liked that, and that was informative and helpful to you in your jobs, especially anybody that manages folks or has to issue messages kind of about what your company is doing. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask that I can pass on to Jolie?
Is she willing to share her slides with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also put the recording up as well,
Okay.
and send it to everybody. Cool. All right. We're not going to be meeting in May because the national conference was supposed to be in May. But as you guys all know, or should know, that the national conference has been moved, I believe it's to September now. So we won't be meeting in May, but in June we will be gathering to do our transition and have another virtual session, and then do all of our awards and everything like that. So be on the lookout for emails about nominating folks for the Planner and Supplier of the Year. So that should be coming out in the next week or two. And then if you haven't already registered for the June meeting, it is up on the website. So hopefully you guys, if you've not already done that, go ahead and register. I believe Myron is working on a speaker just about meeting trends and things like that. So hopefully that will be good. Anybody have anything else for the good of the group? Okay. Thanks for coming, guys, and we will see you in June.
Good seeing y'all.
Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.